As we discussed yesterday, over the weekend, Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis took to the pulpit to defend herself without getting too specific about the assertions that have been made in court filings that she committed at least an ethical breach in appointing a special prosecutor in the Trump racketeering case, who is a romantic partner of hers. And, of course, she's overseeing his spend, if you will, and signing off on payments made to him. So this is a very interesting choice that she made. And I have a theory about why she chose to do what she did. But first, a snippet of what she said.
You cannot expect black women to be perfect and save the world. The Lord is completing us. We are not perfect. We need your prayers. We need to be allowed to stumble. We need grace. With that kind of support, we will move mountains and do Jesus' will, stumbling all the way. So his flawed, hard-headed, and imperfect child has a message for each of you today. Please find a way to do your extraordinary, God-given assignment and make this community and the world a better place for all of his people.
Mm-hmm. She stumbled. We all stumble. The message, I think, getting out front of this is not to those congregants at the church. The message is to the court. She's playing the race card, the race victim card. Don't, be careful about how you handle any challenge to my oversight of this prosecution against Trump and associates. Don't even think about sidelining me, or I'll put this place up for grabs by playing the race card.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, she should have known better to keep her nose clean. I mean, she hired a personal injury attorney to prosecute President Trump, and she was having an affair with him and paying him $500,000 in taxpayer money.
Well, this is a theory on the politics of it, but let's get some review on the law of it, as well as the various other legal wranglings happening concurrently. Andy McCarthy is former Chief Assistant U.S. Attorney, Southern District of New York, Manhattan, contributing editor at National Review, and author of the bestseller Ball of Collusion, The Plot to Rig an Election and Destroy a Presidency. Andy, thanks as always. Appreciate it.
Good morning. How are you guys?
Good. What did you think of Fani Willis's performance?
I think that, sometimes they try to, ring a bell that is past its time. I just think that I think the public is really tired of the, everything is about racism. It's pretty obvious if she's not denying what she's been accused of.
Right.
I read that motion, which is pretty lengthy, but it's interesting reading. And it sounds like they have a lot of backup evidence to support the allegations that were made. And I just think, that most of the country is not going to want to hear this. It's actually going to play to Trump's benefit to a fare thee well. And I think the more basic thing, Dan, is that, a lot of this would be maybe water under the bridge, and they could just bring somebody else in to fix it if the product was a good product. But the problem is the case is awful. The case is a mess. It's not a RICO. It's not a conspiracy. The only thing these 19 people ever did together was get indicted. Usually the first few people who plead guilty and say they'll cooperate with the investigation, what a competent prosecutor makes them do is you plead guilty to the main charge, which here would be the RICO, and you say, yes, there was a RICO conspiracy, I was in it, President Trump was in it, here's what I did, here's what he did. Instead, she pled these people out to a song. They're not pleading. Some of them aren't even pleading guilty to the counts in the indictment. They had to make up new stuff for them to plead guilty to. They're all nonsense pleas with no jail time, which is hardly what you would expect for a racketeering conspiracy that had our democracy hanging by a thread. So none of, it's not being treated like a normal case. But the reason is because it's not a normal case. It's completely incoherent. It's not a crime to try to change the result of an election. Like, there's no statute that says illegally trying to change the result of an election. So in criminal law, you have to, for a conspiracy to be valid, it's got to be a conspiracy to violate a criminal statute. She doesn't have that, so she's tried to paper it over with RICO. And the thing is, a RICO conspiracy, the crime is to be a member of an organization that is trying to continue on in time and space in order to generate income and the like. Here, this thing wasn't even an organization. These 19 people didn't regard themselves as belonging to something. Like, if you're in the Gambino family, you want to belong to the Gambino family, right? You want to keep the existence of the Gambino family to continue. That's what racketeering law is about. This group, they didn't even see themselves as a group, and no matter what happened in terms of the election, on January 20th of 2021, it was going to be over no matter what. So that's not a RICO. That's not a racketeering organization. So the case is a mess. That's the bigger problem she has.
Well,
she's a mess,
but on Fani Willis, what would be an appropriate adjudication of the motion that was filed against her?
Well, I think at a minimum, she's already been disqualified from prosecuting one of the defendants in the investigation. So this is not her first rodeo as far as ethical lapses is concerned. The one thing she said at that, in that church the other day was, she said she's a very flawed person. I think we can all agree with that. The court has already found that to be the case with respect to at least one of the defendants. So I think, if the smart thing for her to do, I think, would be to step aside. She won't, but that would be the thing to do. Legally, the question is, she hired this guy, Nathan Wade, by misrepresenting. This is the allegation, I should say. She misrepresented that she needed money to address the COVID backlog in the office. The backlog of cases that grew up over the pandemic. And she tapped into that money to hire this guy who she's apparently paying. Like, she pays him more than she makes herself, and she's the boss of the office, right? She's paid him like $700,000 or something in the last 2 years. And then, the allegation is she derives benefit of that because they go off on trips together,
right,
and the like. But for the case, the more important thing is she apparently didn't tell Fulton County that she was bringing him on as a special counsel, which she's required by law to do. And then he didn't file his oath of office with the court before he began acting on the case, which he's required by law to do. So the question is the inception of the case injected with illegality such that you can argue that the indictment is insufficient or the indictment is infirm? That's a tough road to hoe, but that's where they're trying to go with this.
He's a personal injury attorney. He's never prosecuted anyone. I mean, and why did it take so long for that to come, bubble up to the surface?
Well, I think it's because no one raised it until this defendant raised it. And from what I gathered, Amy, reading the motion, it took a lot of work. I mean, like, for example, this divorce file that the defendant went into to get a lot of this information, I think they were on to the fact that people were starting to snoop around there. So somehow, and this is very curious under the law of Georgia, they managed to get that thing sealed. So then there was a big to-do over whether it was okay to use the information from it that they had already gotten or not. So I think it was a lot of investigative work to get this information, and then there was some sort of legal landmines about going public with it. And then, the other thing that always happens in these cases is if you're in a 19-defendant case and you see the prosecutor is giving away the store, even to top people who've been labeled as top defendants in the case, like Sidney Powell. She gets a slap on the wrist. You don't want to poke the bear with the prosecutor if you think, maybe I can get one of those deals. So there's probably some hesitancy about raising it for that reason as well. But you're right. There's explosive information in there.
One of the other Trump trials. So the arguments before the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals last week on presidential immunity. Did Trump's lawyer make a mistake by indulging Judge Pan's hypothetical about ordering the assassination of a political opponent, which of course became the headline? Trump's lawyer argues that he could order the assassination of a political opponent, and unless he was impeached and convicted in that political process, he couldn't be prosecuted for ordering a murder. The argument, I mean, so there's that actual argument about, is that a fair reading of presidential privilege? Number one. Number two is, would have been more judicious for his attorney to say, well, he's not charged with anything like that, so we don't have to go into these absurd, incendiary hypotheticals. Let's look at what he's actually been charged with and see how that comports.
Well, the thing is, I think he should have been better prepared for this because it was in the government's brief. Judge Pan just basically, what the government's brief talked about was an assassination that he ordered the National Guard to carry out, and she has more of a flair for the dramatic, so she changed it to SEAL Team 6, which sounds like something they should make a movie out of, right? But you got to, when you know that that's where they're coming, you have to be prepared for that. And you don't get to tell the judge, no, I don't need to answer that because, let's talk about what the charges are here, because the judge can demand an answer to her question. So you have to be prepared with that. And the fact of the matter is, this is what appellate argument is about. What they try to do is take the logic of your position and put it in the worst case scenario that you would have to defend. And I think he should have been prepared forthrightly to say, yes, it's an absurd example because it assumes that the greatest armed forces in the history of the world would carry out an illegal act like that. And it assumes that even though we've gone through a quarter of a millennium without anything like that happening, that's suddenly going to start happening again. But yes, if it's his official act, he has immunity for it, and he's subject to impeachment by Congress, but not prosecution by the federal government. And the fact is, we have a lot of rules that apply to all situations, and most of the time there's no problem with it. Like, for example, attorney-client privilege, or priest-penitent privilege, or spousal privilege. But every now and then, I'm going to commit a gruesome murder where the only witness is my wife, or the only way the prosecutor can make the case is by subpoenaing my lawyer or subpoenaing my priest. Should we get rid of all those privileges because we have a terrible result in one case? Of course not. That's the way that you have to be prepared with your own parade of horribles to answer that. The fact is, the powers of the presidency are awesome. So if a president abuses his power, it could have terrible, terrible results. And in any individual case, such as like Bill Clinton selling a pardon to Mark Rich, every now and then you're going to get a situation where a president is beyond being impeached because he's already served 2 terms, he's out of office, and the power that he used is an unquestioned power of the presidency, as the pardon power is. Every now and then you're going to have a situation where a president is beyond being prosecuted and beyond being impeached. That doesn't mean that the answer to that is to make every presidential action subject to post facto investigation and criminal prosecution by the prosecutors of the next party that comes into office, because we have a lot more evidence of rogue prosecutors using their powers in a political way than we have of presidents ordering murders.
Do you expect that's where the Supreme Court will come down on this once the D.C. Court of Appeals rules against Trump and they take it up to the High Court?
I don't know. I mean, if they were going to use the logic of the case against Nixon in the 80s, where they said no civil lawsuits against the president for official acts, then I think it would make sense to have the same rule for criminal prosecution, because unlike the 1980s, we now no longer have a norm against politicized prosecution, so all presidents will have to worry about it. But on the other hand, this Supreme Court pays a lot more attention to the text of the Constitution and the original intent of it. There is nothing in the Constitution supporting presidential immunity. That court, the Supreme Court in the early 1980s, when they gave it to Nixon, they basically made it up. You know, those were the days when we had pretty freewheeling judicial policy making on the Supreme Court. But after Justice Scalia's career, it became a lot more important what the text says and what the original intent was. And I wish there was immunity in the Constitution, but I don't see it.
I wanted to get your take on the other side, too. I mean, after the spectacle of Hunter Biden showing up to that House Oversight Committee hearing, and now we have more information coming out about the testimony behind closed doors that was provided by Hunter Biden's art dealer, George Burgess, who has, here we go again, undermined the story we've been told by the First Family. One, Hunter Biden did know the identity of 70% of the buyers of his blow art. In point of fact, Burgess said it was unusual. Most artists do not have that in their contract. They know the identity of people who buy their art. And Hunter Biden made it a point to know that the only guy that he represented, this Burgess art dealer dude, the only guy he represented that had such a provision in his contract. Number two, Joe Biden was talking to this art dealer that was repping Hunter Biden. We now know Joe Biden called him. Joe Biden called him when his daughter graduated from some camp to congratulate him. So here again, Hunter Biden makes a friend who's pitching his blow art to Dem donors for obscene prices. And all of a sudden, Joe's involved, too, making a new friend.
So the Bidens are involved in the sleazy financial arrangement?
I know, shocker.
Knock me over.
No, I know, but I mean, just in terms of, you know, because there's a question about whether it's judicious politically. This is a political process, as you always make the point about impeachment. Is it politically judicious to go after Joe Biden? Is this warranted? Does the evidence lead one, you know, applying a reasonable man standard to say this person has committed high crimes and misdemeanors? Are we getting closer?
Well, I think that if you're going to do this, the most outrageous thing that Biden has done is the border. That's the most indefensible thing. Mm-hmm. And I think this comes up as a close second when you're talking about overall corruption and cashing in on political influence, particularly with anti-American and corrupt regimes. But I think if you want to get the public to buy into this, you have to hit them with something that's affecting everyone in the country. And Biden's complete collapse of border enforcement, with the result that you have thousands and thousands, millions of people illegally in the country who are overwhelming the ability of cities and states across the country to deal with them. That's the big issue. And I don't think they're going to get any, you know, if they're going to do an impeachment effort, that has to be in the front. It can't be about Mayorkas. I mean, you want to impeach Mayorkas, fine. But Mayorkas is just carrying out Biden's policy. So, you know, it just doesn't make sense to me to do an impeachment where you know that the Senate is not going to convict anyway. But why not at least lead with your best stuff and have this be the strong second that argues that this guy is just completely corrupt from beginning to end?
Andy McCarthy is a former chief assistant U.S. attorney, Southern District of New York. That's Manhattan. Contributing editor at National Review, author of the bestseller Ball of Collusion, The Plot to Rig an Election and Destroy a Presidency. Andy, thank you as always.
Thanks. Have a great day.
You too, and he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
It's news, opinion, insight. This is Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
A storm is on the horizon, and you need to keep the lights on no matter what. Your business relies on the power being on 24/7. It's